A wave of dread washed over me the moment I noticed the caretaker's shed door bolted shut from the outside. Through the thin wooden walls, I could hear my son's muffled cries. My wife stood beside me, her face pale with worry as she called out his name. When he didn't respond right away, my stomach churned. Our 8-year-old son, Dylan, is autistic. Sudden changes, loud noises, or being left alone can overwhelm him. Seeing that rusted shed locked tight made every hair on my neck stand on end. A small crowd began to gather, drawn by the echo of Dylan's panicked voice, but no one seemed sure how to help. Then she appeared. Karen, our new HOA president, striding forward with a self-assured glare, arms folded across her chest as if this were a minor inconvenience. I had never been particularly fond of Karen from the start. She enforced every trivial neighborhood rule with zero tolerance, barking at kids to stay off the grass, scolding dog owners for letting their pets sniff the community rose bushes, or fining people for leaving trash cans out a minute too long. But today, she had crossed the line so dark I couldn't fathom how she could justify it to herself or anyone else. As soon as I saw her, I marched forward, jaw clenched, my only goal to get Dylan out safely. She smirked, and it made my blood boil. "Don't look at me like that," she said coldly, her tone dripping with arrogance. "Your son was running around the gardens, disturbing the peace, so I locked him in there to calm him down." The audacity of her words left me breathless. My wife's hands trembled as she gripped my arm for support. I inhaled sharply and tried the shed's handle, yanking desperately, but it wouldn't budge. Inside, Dylan's voice rose in pitch. If he felt cornered, he'd be terrified beyond words. His sensory profile made enclosed spaces in unfamiliar settings especially distressing. "Open it right now," I growled, fury pulsing through me. Karen merely shrugged. "When he learns to behave," she declared, "then maybe I'll consider letting him out. We have rules here, and I'm tired of him rummaging through community property." My wife's eyes filled with tears as Dylan's muffled sobs grew louder, cutting me to the core. It was the kind of cry he let out when he felt trapped, with no way to escape the chaos in his mind. Some neighbors arrived, unsure how to respond. Beatrice, a woman who usually kept to herself, gasped and tried to intervene. "Karen," she pleaded, "you can't lock a child in there. He could suffocate." Karen scowled. "Mind your own business," she snapped. "This is between me and these so-called parents who can't control their kid." A couple of men stepped closer, looking ready to break down the door, but Karen held the key, brandishing it like a trophy. "You'd better not damage HOA property," she warned. "I'll fine you so heavily, you'll wish you'd never come near this shed." I fought the urge to grab her arm or snatch the key. Escalating the confrontation could make Karen's wrath even more vicious. Instead, I took a shaky breath and forced a calmer tone. "Look," I said, "my son is autistic. He doesn't understand your rules the way you do. He's not hurting anyone by exploring the gardens." She narrowed her eyes. "I'm tired of excuses. A child who can't follow instructions doesn't belong in a well-regulated community like ours. This place has standards." My wife stiffened beside me, tears streaming down her cheeks. Our friend Tyler dialed 911, whispering into the phone that a child was locked in a shed against his will, in distress, and possibly in danger. Karen rolled her eyes when she realized the police were being called. "Go ahead," she sneered. "Call whoever you want. By the time they arrive, your son will have learned to stay out of areas he doesn't belong." I clenched my fists. Beatrice looked ready to collapse from nerves. Another neighbor, Martin, tried reasoning with Karen. "This is unlawful confinement. Let him out." She turned her nose up, ignoring him. I pressed my ear against the wooden boards, speaking gently to Dylan. "Buddy, I'm here," I called, my voice shaking despite my efforts. "Don't be scared. We'll get you out." His response was a keening cry that tore at my heart. I heard him scratching the walls inside. The shed was cramped, filled with old gardening tools that could be hazardous if he panicked. My mind flooded with images of him tripping over a shovel or cutting himself on a rusty hoe. Dylan often struggled with the coordination under stress, and being confined in darkness would only heighten his anxiety. Tyler finished speaking to the 911 operator and signaled that help was on the way, though he didn't know how soon. Karen stood there, arms still crossed, as if proud of herself. She launched into a self-righteous tirade about how the neighborhood would thank her for teaching misbehaving children a lesson. My wife moved closer to the shed, calling Dylan's name softly, trying to console him from outside. My heart pounded, adrenaline surging as I considered breaking in. Then faint sirens wailed in the distance. Karen smirked, unfazed. Good. Let them come. I'll explain how your boy broke the landscaping rules. Her lack of empathy left me speechless. For a moment, everything felt surreal, as if this couldn't be happening. Dylan's sobbing continued. He was likely overwhelmed by the darkness, the fertilizer's strange smell, and the claustrophobic walls. A pair of neighbors suggested using a crowbar, but we didn't have one, and we worried that forcing the door might collapse old shelving inside, potentially harming Dylan. The sirens grew louder until a police cruiser sped around the corner. 2 officers jumped out, scanning the scene in confusion. Distraught neighbors, my wife and me huddled by a locked shed, and Karen holding the key. The older officer, introducing himself as Officer Ramos, asked, "What's going on here?" My voice caught. "My son's locked inside," I managed. "He's autistic and terrified." Without missing a beat, Ramos turned to Karen. "Ma'am, is this true?" She gave a haughty shrug, tossing her hair. "Yes, it's an HOA matter. He was trespassing, so I secured him for his own safety." Ramos blinked, clearly taken aback. "That's not how these situations are handled. You have no right to confine him." Karen's lip curled. "I'm the HOA president," she declared. "We're allowed to protect community assets. That child was messing with the property." The other officer, a younger woman named Janice, exchanged a glance with Ramos. Both looked appalled. My wife tugged at Janice's sleeve, pleading for them to open the door. The officers demanded Karen unlock the shed immediately. She pursed her lips, shook her head, and stepped back. "He can stay in there," she snapped. "Maybe it'll teach him to respect our guidelines." My composure cracked. I lunged toward the padlock, ready to yank it loose. Ramos intervened, placing a firm but gentle hand on my shoulder, asking me to let them handle it. Tyler pointed at Karen, shaking with anger. "She's refusing to unlock it. You need to do something." Janice confronted Karen, her voice sharp. "Ma'am, that's false imprisonment. If you don't comply, you could face immediate arrest." Karen tightened her grip on the key. "You can't arrest me for following the bylaws," she insisted, clearly believing she was untouchable. Then something unexpected crackled through the officer's radio, a frantic update. Both exchanged worried looks. "We just got another call," Ramos said quietly, trying to stay professional. Then he raised his voice. "Ma'am, open it now, or we're forcing entry." Karen still wouldn't budge, looking ready to toss the key away. Ramos signaled Janice, who stepped aside to speak into her shoulder radio. I caught words like armed assistance and unverified threat. My wife gripped my hand, alarmed that the situation was escalating further. Dylan's sobs had turned into hiccuping gasps, his voice hoarse. The officers realized that if Karen threw the key into a bush or storm drain, it would complicate everything. Ramos told her she was being detained for questioning. He reached for her wrist, but she jerked back, yelping, "You can't do this. I'm not a criminal." In the confusion, she dropped the key. I sprang forward, grabbing it before it hit the ground. My wife reached out, turning the lock with trembling fingers, while Tyler helped to keep the door from swinging open too quickly. As it opened, I saw Dylan curled up in a corner, clutching his ears. Only a sliver of light from a crack in the roof pierced the darkness. My heart twisted at the sight of tears streaking his cheeks, his eyes red and puffy. I rushed in, scooping him into my arms, whispering, "It's okay, buddy. We've got you." He trembled violently, clinging to me with all his strength. My wife hurried to his side, speaking softly, telling him he was safe. "Behind us," Karen shrieked, as the officers placed her in handcuffs. "You can't arrest me for protecting community property," she howled, utterly unhinged. Some neighbors watched in stunned silence. Others muttered that she'd finally gotten what she deserved. Tyler shook his head, exhaling harshly. "I never thought she'd go this far," he murmured. While Ramos guided Karen to the cruiser, Janice helped us lead Dylan away from the shed. We wanted to ensure he received a medical check or at least a moment to calm down. He was breathing heavily, eyes darting as if he couldn't believe he was free. Then an ambulance arrived, but so did something surreal. A low rumble, like distant thunder, grew louder. 2 army tanks rolled down the street toward our cul-de-sac. The crowd gasped collectively, jaws dropping. Apparently, the 911 calls had been miscommunicated. Perhaps someone reported a hostage situation with potential weapons, and the dispatcher escalated it. 3 minutes after Dylan was freed, these enormous, camouflage-painted machines stopped by the caretaker's shed. The scene was absurd. A quiet, suburban street with manicured lawns overshadowed by military vehicles. Soldiers hopped out, scanning the area. Several neighbors retreated, unsure what was happening. One soldier approached the officers, exchanging quick words. The confusion was palpable. The officers hadn't requested this response, but someone's frantic call had prompted a serious escalation. An older soldier, presumably in command, walked up to Ramos, who explained the situation was under control. I stood holding Dylan, trying to help him process the chaos. He was already traumatized from the shed, and now tanks and uniformed soldiers crowded our street. My wife stared in disbelief, her eyes darting between me and the military presence. Even Karen in handcuffs looked stunned, her face pale, her jaw slack. This was beyond anything I could have imagined when I stepped outside that afternoon. The soldiers eventually realized there was no large-scale threat, no armed standoff, no reason for tanks in front of our community garden. They apologized, explaining that urgent calls about a special needs child locked in a small enclosure had prompted the response. The fiasco made me want to laugh at its absurdity, though my nerves were frayed. One soldier approached Dylan, speaking gently, asking if he was okay. Recognizing the boy's distress, he stepped back to give us space. Dylan sniffled, burying his face in my shoulder. My wife explained that he was autistic, that loud noises and commotion disoriented him further. The soldier nodded, stepping away. The realization that people had responded so drastically underscored how dangerous Karen's actions were. Not only had she locked up our child, but she'd triggered an event that brought military tanks to a suburban neighborhood. As the chaos subsided, the soldiers departed, leaving a heavy hush. Neighbors looked drained. Some tried to comfort us, while others stared at Karen with contempt as the officers read her rights. The road smelled faintly of exhaust and churned up dust from the tank treads. My wife and I sat Dylan on a patch of grass, letting him breathe fresh air. His tears still flowed, but his sobs had softened to whimpers. I felt immense gratitude for Tyler, who'd called 911 so quickly. If we'd faced Karen alone, it might have taken longer to free Dylan. Karen was taken away in the cruiser, her shrill protests echoing. She screamed about her right to do whatever she pleased as HOA president. No one rushed to defend her. A paramedic checked Dylan's vitals, shining a flashlight in his eyes. He flinched but allowed the brief exam, gripping my hand tightly. They concluded he was shaken but not physically harmed. The main concern was his emotional state. We decided to let him rest at home in a familiar environment rather than take him to a hospital. That evening, after the last police car left and the crowd dispersed, my wife and I tried to make sense of it all. On our living room couch, Dylan curled between us under a blanket, asleep from exhaustion. My wife leaned her head on my shoulder. "How could she think this was okay?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I shook my head, unable to answer. Karen's righteousness had always been frustrating, but I never imagined she'd imprison a child. We sat in silence, listening to Dylan's soft breathing, grateful he was home. Over the next few days, news of the incident spread. Some neighbors were outraged at Karen's cruelty. Others admitted they'd seen red flags, like when she threatened a disabled veteran for parking too long in a visitor spot or followed teenagers to ensure they weren't loitering. Rumors circulated that the HOA board was drafting a motion to remove Karen. My wife and I supported that wholeheartedly. But Dylan's recovery wasn't immediate. For nights, he woke panicked, calling for us. He didn't know how to process being locked in darkness. His anxiety about leaving the house intensified. Even a walk in our yard made him jittery, as if Karen might reappear. We explained that she'd been taken away, that she wouldn't return, but logic couldn't erase the trauma. We attended an emergency HOA meeting that weekend, leaving Dylan with my wife's sister to spare him stress. At the community center, the room buzzed with whispers. Some neighbors expressed concern for Dylan, others worried about the neighborhood's reputation. The HOA board members wore grave expressions. The chairperson, Robert, cleared his throat. "We have a serious matter to address," he began. Recently, our HOA president, Karen Whitaker, was involved in a troubling incident with a resident's child. He gestured for us to speak. My wife and I stood, hearts pounding. She described how Dylan, our autistic son, was locked in the shed by Karen, who claimed she was protecting community property. I added details about Dylan's meltdown, how we tried reasoning with Karen only to face contempt. The mention of army tanks drew gasps. One neighbor exclaimed, "Army tanks? Seriously?" We nodded, explaining how 911 calls had escalated the matter. A hush fell as we recounted the horrifying minutes before the police freed Dylan. My voice trembled, but I pressed on, explaining how Dylan still had nightmares. I wanted everyone to understand the consequences of Karen's actions, not just a petty dispute. My wife added that if Karen had kept him locked longer, his panic could have led to serious self-harm. Robert looked shaken. Some board members avoided our eyes. Neighbors murmured that they'd suspected Karen's leadership was out of control, but never imagined such cruelty. Robert took a deep breath. "Based on what we've heard, the board will proceed with an immediate vote to remove Karen Whitaker from her presidency and any official HOA capacity. We'll cooperate fully with the police investigation." The room seemed to exhale, relief and tension mixing. An older resident stood, her voice quivering. "I'd like to propose a formal apology to the family. We didn't stop Karen sooner, and we should have. That boy didn't deserve this." Others nodded, voicing agreement. The apology didn't erase Dylan's pain, but it showed the neighborhood was willing to stand with us. Robert called a quick vote, and the board unanimously stripped Karen of her position. A younger member suggested reviewing the bylaws to prevent such misuse in the future. After the meeting, neighbors approached us with shock and sympathy. I appreciated their support, but wondered if any had seen Karen's danger earlier. If they had, Dylan might have been spared. Karen faced charges of unlawful restraint and child endangerment. Despite her social media rants about being a victim of a conspiracy, the evidence was overwhelming. Multiple witness statements, Dylan's frightened reaction, phone footage of Karen ignoring his cries, and police body cam recordings. The legal process moved forward, and we sought counseling for Dylan with a therapist specializing in children on the spectrum. He gradually opened up about realizing he couldn't open the door, how the darkness closed in, and how he thought no one heard him scream. Hearing this was gut-wrenching. My wife cried at night, blaming herself for not watching him closely. I reminded her Karen's actions weren't our fault. We never imagined such a barbaric act in our neighborhood. The tank incident went semi-viral online, with headlines like, HOA leader locks child in shed, military shows up. It was surreal but sparked conversations about unchecked HOA authority. Many called for re-examining such associations, especially if leaders acted like dictators. In therapy, the counselor suggested gradually reintroducing Dylan to outdoor spaces where he once felt safe. At first, the shed filled him with dread, but we took slow steps, starting with short walks, letting him carry a stuffed animal for comfort. Each day he grew braver, though the memory lingered in his anxious glances. One evening, with the counselor's guidance, we approached the shed again in soft light. My wife and I held Dylan's hands, reassuring him the door was open, that no one would trap him. He stiffened at the fertilizer's smell, but peeked inside, seeing it was empty. His eyes scanned the shadows, and he squeezed my hand. We stood briefly, letting him absorb that the threat was gone, then backed away. That night he told my wife he didn't want to fear the shed anymore. It was just part of the neighborhood. We held him close, proud of his strength, but saddened he'd needed such resilience. Karen's trial came quickly. We were subpoenaed to testify, but spared Dylan from appearing, providing his statement via video. In court, we described the ordeal, from discovering the locked door to the tank's arrival. Karen, at the defendant's table, looked diminished, glaring but silent. Her attorney argued she meant to protect Dylan from gardening tools. We countered that she refused to unlock the door even for police. The prosecution highlighted her hateful remarks and disregard for Dylan's well-being, painting her as an arrogant official abusing power. Neighbors confirmed her pattern of harassment. The judge had little patience for her justifications. Karen was found guilty of false imprisonment and child endangerment, receiving probation, community service, and mandatory counseling. We took no pleasure in her punishment, but felt relief that justice was served. The HOA reorganized, introducing guidelines to protect residents with special needs, ensuring no one could misinterpret rules so callously. Neighbors admired Dylan's bravery, offering help. His nightmares lessened, and he showed renewed interest in exploring, though he avoided the shed alone. One Saturday, he asked to feed the ducks at the community pond near the shed, a big step. We went with breadcrumbs, and as we scattered them, I glanced at the shed. The door was ajar, and the padlock rusted on a table. I breathed easier, knowing Karen could never harm Dylan again. Tyler walked by with his kids, waving. I thanked him again for calling 911. Every second mattered. He nodded, glad Dylan was okay, and the truth was out. I can't believe she hid behind HOA rules, he muttered. She was basically a jailer. At home, Dylan continued therapy, learning coping strategies. My wife and I reminded each other that one hateful person couldn't destroy our faith in humanity. Dylan's smile returned, a testament to his spirit. The counselor suggested a social story, simple pictures and words, to help Dylan process trauma and feel safe. Sometimes we passed the tank tread marks on the pavement, and I chuckled grimly at neighbors' shocked faces that day. The tank's arrival, in a strange way, underscored Karen's violation. A single police car might not have shown her the gravity, but the tanks made it undeniable. Karen moved away after her sentencing, unable to face a neighborhood that despised her. We didn't celebrate, just breathed easier. The new HOA president apologized personally, promising a supportive inclusive community, especially for families like ours. They implemented a sensory garden with soft mulch, wind chimes, and bright flowers for kids like Dylan. Neighbors volunteered to build it, and Dylan helped, proud to contribute. On the garden's completion, kids explored its textures, and Dylan showed younger ones how to touch lamb's ear plants gently. The air felt light, free of tension. My wife and I shared a smile, acknowledging we'd turned heartbreak into positive change. When Dylan said he wasn't scared of the shed anymore, I felt warmth. He knew Karen was gone, the lock removed, and he wouldn't be alone again. Emotionally, he still felt a pang near those walls, but it lessened daily. One evening, he showed me a crayon drawing of a tank by a small building. "That's the day you saved me," he said quietly. "And the army guys came." My heart squeezed. "Yeah, buddy," I replied. "We all came for you. We weren't leaving you there." He nodded, coloring the sky bright blue. I can't erase Karen's smug face at Dylan's terrified eyes, or the tank's roar. But I've learned one person's cruelty can spark a community's compassion if people stand up. Neighbors rallied, police acted swiftly, and the tank's absurd arrival drove home that locking a child in a shed is indefensible. Now, walking with Dylan, I notice a kinder atmosphere. Neighbors nod, kids wave. We learned how quickly circumstances can spiral when authority is abused, but also how unity overcomes intimidation. Dylan taught us vulnerability isn't weakness. He endured a nightmare, yet emerged with empathy for others who might be misunderstood. Sometimes people ask if I'm bitter or shaken. I get angry if I dwell on it. How could a woman think locking a disabled boy in a shed was justified? But I hold gratitude for those who called 911, the police's swift action, the tank's improbable arrival, and the support afterward. If you witness injustice, my advice is simple. Speak up, intervene, call for help. Don't let someone like Karen rely on fear. Choice may seem powerful, but that power crumbles when decent people refuse unethical commands. Dylan shouldn't have endured this, but we learned we weren't alone. His progress continues. He laughs more, and when he passes the shed, he pauses briefly before moving on. We can't rewrite the past, but we can shape a future where no parent watches a tyrant punish a child for being different. This ordeal reminds us to hold people accountable when they cross moral lines, even if they claim to represent rules or bylaws.